Now this is the third video in a series of 7 in which we're looking at the 7 deadly sins. And joining me once again is my good friend Ryan Brom, pastor of this church in beautiful Brighton, Ontario, Canada.
Now, as we talked about last week, the 7 deadly sins are pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, anger, and sloth. These were first established in about the 6th century, and when they were established, they weren't necessarily the worst of all sins, but seen as a starting point from which all other sins were born out of. And so 2 weeks ago, we looked at pride. Last week, we looked at greed, and this week, we're looking at gluttony. All right.
Now, when I was growing up, the church that my family attended, while it didn't encourage people to drink or smoke, at the same time, it didn't consider those things as sinful either. Contrast that with the churches that some of my friends attended, where if you dared drink just a sip of alcohol or take a puff of a cigarette, then you were straight on the fast track to hell. But what I've always found interesting was that many of those same people had no qualms with going to all-you-can-eat buffets every Sunday after church. They obviously didn't see gluttony as a sin. And yet, clearly the Bible condemns gluttony as sinful. And in the 6th century, it was classified as one of the 7 deadly sins for good reason. Gluttony not only is a form of idolatry, as Ryan is about to explain, but throughout most of human history, eating more than your fair share ultimately meant that others would go hungry. You see, prior to the modern marvels of synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides, which have given us such an overabundance of food in the modern era that for the first time in human history, obesity is actually considered a health problem amongst the poor. But prior to all of this, throughout most of human history, the human food supply rested upon a razor's edge between starvation and just having enough to eat. And so to be a glutton, to eat more than your fair share, was seen as something very serious.
When the Israelites walked out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, you would have thought that they would have been so excited to be set free from the oppression of their captors. And in many regards, they were. But it wasn't long before they were wandering in the wilderness that they went, this food that God is giving us, this manna, it's stale. I don't like it. I want something better. And in Numbers chapter 11, we see the Israelites saying, let's go back to the land of Egypt where they had great food. They had melons, they had leeks, they had onions, and oh, it was so good. And God responded to them with, I'll give them meat. I'll give them what they want. They'll have so much meat, it'll be coming out of their nostrils. And you can feel the fiery anger that God was feeling towards his people in Numbers chapter 11. So when God's anger was burning towards the Israelites so much where he said, I'm going to give them meat, I'm going to give them quail so it comes out of their noses, what was really going on there was God was incredibly angry at the idolatry that was within the hearts of the people. Because the people were essentially saying, we do not want this God to be our God. We'd rather be slaves to Pharaoh, who was seen as a God, and we'd rather have his food, have him be our provider. At the heart of gluttony is having something else as your ultimate savior, and it's your stomach.
And let's not kid ourselves, gluttony is very much a part of our own culture. You have a whole plethora of all-you-can-eat buffets, all-night drive-thrus, and Uber Eats.
Well, and probably after Uber Eats, they got Uber Feed, where they take that fast food and start shoving it in your mouth for you. Yeah, kind of uber weird, right? But what all of this fast food and high fatty content does actually has a physiological effect on us. That within our guts, there's an entire ecosystem that gets built, these tiny microbes craving and desiring these kind of fatty foods. So that way it's this vicious, endless cycle, and really in a lot of ways resembles that whole idea of idolatry. That there's something inside of us that we are serving rather than using our bodies to serve the one who created us.
Well, thanks for joining us this Thursday. Please join us next Thursday as we're going to be looking at the sin of lust. And if you haven't seen the previous 2, Pride and Greed, why not click on the end cards over there? And if you haven't already, please do consider subscribing. We're not even halfway through our series yet. I'm sure you'll enjoy the rest of them.
And be sure to click the like button.
Yes, and share button too. Thanks so much, and I hope to see all of you next Thursday.